conversation on working with internal and external coaches. Absolutely delighted to have all of you here. Many of you are familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. Unfortunately, everyone is in the mute mode, and the reason for that is because of the number of people on the call. That's how we manage sound. So we want to make sure we answer all of your questions as we go through the conversation today. Many of you submitted questions when you registered for the class, so we've got those, and some of them are built in as we go, and some of them we will be addressing, just pulling them out, that kind of thing, where they fit. Going to make sure we get them all answered. We have a quick 30 minutes. At the end of the 30 minutes, I do have something for each and every one of you here, and then, of course, in addition to that, we'll be taking additional questions. As we go through the information, if you have a question, type it into the question panel. I will watch that as we go through and work to get everything addressed on the way through the conversation. So, diving in, what are we going to cover today? Our agenda in this 30 minutes is to start with definitions, talk pros and cons for internal and external coaches, considerations in terms of working with either and or internal, external, some specific tips for you, and then, of course, to give you some resources. Starting with our definitions, and many of you are familiar with this. I know those of you who have gone through the program have seen it. We do have enough new faces, and of course, the definition's so great it's worth repeating. So the ICF defines coaching this way. It's a strategic partnership in which the coach empowers the client. So it really is about the coach empowering the client. That's huge. And there's a big difference between telling someone what to do and how to do it and empowering them to figure it out and plan for themselves. So it's about empowering them. They create their action plans. They figure out how to move past their obstacles. And it's about them achieving what they want. It's based on their choice. Now let's talk definitions for internal versus an external coach. So an internal coach is an employee of the company where the coaching is being done. They work there. It's within many areas of responsibility for them, so it's part of their job. And then increasingly, we are seeing companies that hire people where it's their whole job to coach other employees. So an internal coach is an employee. Now, this does, in and of itself, bring up some challenges. Some of you asked some of the questions about this. So, for example, if you're an internal coach, what that means is your first challenge is, okay, how are we separating your function as an employee of the company versus your function as a coach of the company? One of the big areas for this is if you're an HR professional, many HR professionals are expected to coach as part of their job. Well, who's their client and where's their loyalty? Because as an employee of the company, their loyalty is to the company, and the company is their client. As a coach, all of a sudden that's different because the client is the person they're being coached, and that's where the responsibility is. And this comes across in ethics, confidentiality, everything. So the short answer to the question several of you asked about how you address some of this is having the conversation on the front end and deciding, okay, when's it coaching, when is it HR, how do we handle coaching, how do we handle HR, what are the ethics, the confidentiality, et cetera. And companies are doing this. The key is having that conversation on the front end, setting it up, and being very transparent with the company, the employees, everyone on this is what it is, and this is how it works. So that's an initial piece for you, and of course, some of the resources and what I have for you at the end, that's going to add to that. If you have more questions, do keep typing them in. Okay, so if that's an internal coach, what's an external coach? An external coach is someone who is in business for themselves, and basically what's happening is the company is hiring them to provide the coaching. So in what we're talking about, working with internal and external companies, let's say the company is XYZ company, they will have internal coaches, employees that are coaching people, and they will also hire external coaches, people who are from outside the company and do the coaching work based on a service agreement and a coaching agreement. So they're external to the organization, and that's how these are differentiated. Now, in addition to that, very important to note, the client is the person being coached, and the company is actually the sponsor. So for external coaches, one of the challenges that comes up is they think the company is their client. They think, oh, okay, I'll tell the company everything that's going on in that coaching engagement. And that's not the case at all. The sponsor is the company. That's who's paying for it. And so as a coach, it's recognizing, okay, I'm external to the company, and yet they're the ones who are paying me, and I want to keep them happy. And at the same time, the confidentiality, the responsibility is owed to the client, the individual they're actually coaching. So it's incredibly important that before the coaching starts, just like with an internal coach, you're very clear on what the parameters are, what information is exchanged, and how is that information exchanged. So setting it up on the front end and being transparent with everyone is going to make it so much easier as you go through the relationship and address the different components. So let's move into pros and cons. Because, yes, with both internal and external coaches, there are pros and cons. Let's talk about them. Okay, first off, the pros to an internal coach. When you have an internal coach, it's a soft cost. In other words, they're a salary employee, and the coaching work that they do is really inherent to their job. So instead of it being a hard cost, you're spending money on this, it's soft because it's incorporated in the work they're doing. They're accessible. They're right there. They work in the offices as well. They know the culture of the company, and they know the people inside the company. So they're very aware of that. Having internal coaches actually does something additional for the company. It supports creating a coaching culture inside of the organization. And that's a fabulous pro, because a coaching culture is one where there's productivity, there's employee engagement, etc. So definitely a pro. Now on the con side of internal, the confidentiality question. Okay, what gets shared, what doesn't get shared. And even when, as an internal coach, you're very clear, you have the conversation, okay, this is HR, this is coaching, HR notes are part of that file, coaching notes, no. That's the only people who see those are the person doing the coaching and the person being coached. That's it, and they're not part of the records at the company. That would violate confidentiality. Well, then what happens is this. You'll have that employee's manager say, well, I want to know what's going on. You know, this is my employee. They report to me what they do with their time, that kind of thing. That's all my responsibility. I got to know what's happening. And as the internal coach, you're saying, well, no, that's not okay. And if you happen to have, by taken those notes on a company-owned computer or used a company email, that manager can do an end run and access that information. So there are some definite cons on the side of confidentiality. Sometimes it's the logistical of how you have to manage the record. Sometimes it's that end run piece because of them being accessible if a company computer or email was used. And sometimes it's pure perception. An employee of the company is going to know that, gee, this is an HR person. They keep records, and there's all this other parts to it, and they feel uncomfortable even with the reassurances. So sometimes it's perception in addition to the reality of some of the challenges behind it. Internal conflicts can be a challenge. That internal coach, you know, who they know and what they know about different people and what the politics are, etc. In addition to that, let's be real, we're all human. There's going to be situational biases. Well, you're saying this, and gosh, no, it's to be something different because I'm here. So that can get in the way. And then, of course, the competing priorities. back to the idea of, gosh, if I'm in HR, gee, that they're telling me they're going to leave the company, and as a coach, I'm not supposed to share that. As an HR person, I want to know that because it affects some things we do. And there's all kinds of scenarios like that where there's competing priorities for that internal coach. Okay, pros, cons. Now, what about an external coach? What are the pros and what are the cons there? Well, on the pro side, coaching expertise, an external coach is doing this as their entire career. So an internal coach has a lot of time and energy put into other job responsibilities, other areas of expertise as well. For an external coach, the only thing they're doing is that coaching. Their standards and ethics. Typically, an external coach is a member of the International Coach Federation. They have a code of ethics. They're accountable to that code of ethics. And as a member of the International Coach Federation, there's actually a process whereby if there's a complaint or whatever, the Federation will investigate it. So knowing that they're a professional coach and doing it as a business is going to give you a lot of awareness of, hey, they're all about their expertise as a coach. They've got those standards and ethics in place. In addition to that, their specific experience in terms of the coaching role, because an external coach is doing coaching a lot. There's a lot more time and a lot of experience in it, etc. An external coach is going to have the opportunity to bring in the outside perspective, a fresh perspective, a different set of eyes, somebody asking different questions because of a different experience. And that can be a pro. They're also able to address those sensitive issues. So, for example, when you have an executive inside of an organization and they've got something going on that's very personal to them, whether it's at work or at home or whatever it is, it's pretty tough for them to address that with an internal coach. When you have an external coach, it becomes a lot easier to address that, because the external coach isn't there and involved in the day-to-day, nor are they in the chain of command inside that organization. So having those conversations about those sensitive issues gets easier. On the con side for external coaches, sourcing a coach. How do you find a really good coach? And of course, we're going to give you some information on that. We've got a great option for you there. Scheduling coaching. So depending on who's managing this, how that's coordinated, etc., can be a challenge. The idea of coordinating services. Okay, what coaching is authorized, how many sessions, how long, etc. And of course the cost, because an external coach is getting paid and it's straight out cutting a check and paying them. It's a hard cost as compared to the soft cost of an internal. So those costs. Now, let's explore. What do you want to do? You're actually, as an organization, a company, is going to be best served by a combination of both internal and external coaches. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think just the pros and cons, addressing those most effectively. So what are the considerations here? Well, if you're going to have these different coaches, first off, the American Management Association said, working with an external coach is significantly related to a successful coaching experience, regardless of the coachee level inside the organization. And the reason for that goes back to what we were talking about, that perception of confidentiality, those sensitive issues, the outside perspective, etc. So having an outside coach brings that value for addressing some of those issues. At the same time, when you have internal coaches available, that means coaching is more broadly available. And what that an organization is significant success overall. And here's the key to it. You want to use it for the supervisors or all employees so that it's available to everyone. Okay, more. American Management Association again. And here's the big catch to all of this. The internally based methods of training coaches, they're not as effective external training for internal coaches is going to enhance your success. Well, that makes sense because internally you've got the knowledge base, the information that's there, the training programs that are going on, and is it getting you to the same level as far as coaching and coaching competencies? So for internal coaches, you do want the external training, and the research bears that out. Another consideration, again, American Management Association. Despite the difference between coaching and other types of training, the best thing to do is consider it part of the overall development process. So think talent development, think organizational development. It's part of the big picture in terms of what coaching is. Now, think also in terms of your own skill development. Best practices. You do want to work with internal and external coaches. Use external training for your internal coaches. Very important on those best practices. And have that coaching incorporated within training and development efforts. So depending on the organization and what department you have, it may be a training and development department, it may be an organizational development department. You specifically want coaching managed there as a best practice. Now, a couple of other statistics, and if you've been to some of the programs, we do share these. I think they're incredibly insightful. You see, what's one of the reasons companies want a coaching culture or coaching? And the bottom line is this. It's about turnover. It's about retention of the top talent. It's about engagement and therefore productivity. And what happens is this. People don't leave the company. They leave their boss, whoever their manager or supervisor is. And what that means to each and every one of us is that it's about that coaching culture. So if the boss is the one that's chasing them out the door, how do we create the coaching culture to engage employees and increase productivity? Well, let's go into it. What does coaching do? Well, when you take coach training, for those of you that are internal coaches, those of you external coaches, you know this. Well, coaching skills are also being taught to managers and leaders because a big piece of it is the communication skills, the listening, the language that is clear, direct, and respectful, and the questions, the way the questions are asked. The people skills, recognizing the different personalities and knowing how to adjust to different personalities. And goal setting. When a manager or a leader, and of course even us individually, have an effective process for creating change and motivating follow-through, of course that's powerful. Of course it's going to have an impact. So what are the tips? If we pull together the different best practices, when you have a coaching program, you want to know the reasons for it. Okay? What are the reasons for starting the program, running the program, et cetera? Because here's the bottom line. Having coaching, whether it's internal or external coaches or a combination of both, yeah, there's an investment. There's an investment of time and money to make that happen. So you want to know the reasons for it. What are we hoping to gain from the coaching program? Now, some of it is going to be at an organizational level. We want a higher level of engagement. We want to increase our retention of our top talent, reducing the turnover there. We want to improve productivity. We want to hit different sales numbers, et cetera. On the talent development side, coaching is the single best technique in terms of, and this is in response to one of the questions here, in terms of improving the opportunities for changing in behavior, because coaching works with individuals on what are their what are their areas of skill development. What do they want to accomplish? How are they going to go about doing it? They identify their own barriers. They figure out how they are going to move forward. That's huge. So there are a lot of different reasons for engaging in a coaching relationship. Oh, and I want to make sure I give a nod to these. When you have external coaches, most often they're working with the higher level employees, the high potentials and their top leaders, the C-suite, top level management, et cetera. The reason for that is the cost. Okay, very often a reason for bringing them in is as simple as having a sounding board. Because when you have high-level management leadership, having someone where they can think out loud, bounce ideas around, start developing strategies, etc., that's powerful. Now, the challenge there is, okay, if we're going to define our reasons for coaching, how measurable is that? Very often companies get hung up in the idea of, we've got to know what the return is if we're going to invest in this. Yes, there are a lot of studies on coaching that demonstrate the return on investment, and there's also research that says, yeah, if we get too hung up on that, we're going to actually minimize the value of the coaching. So know your reasons, and also know that sometimes the impact of coaching that is qualitative is incredibly significant, and its value in and of itself, whether or not you can quantify the impact. Okay, so knowing your reasons. What else? Another huge tip in terms of best practices is to have your internal coaches trained externally. Find an external training program. Yes, I've got a great resource for that. Bottom line is you want it to be an ICF-approved program. Then use your internal coaches for entry level through supervisor levels of employees. So speaking right to the best practices, right to what the research shows, and also, quite frankly, it makes sense in terms of, back to those soft costs, making it realistic, and then it's possible to have it for everyone in the organization. And then you bring in your external coaches for the high potentials and the higher levels of management. For example, external coaches for the coaches running the coaching program makes sense. And then, of course, up the chain in terms of who those management people are. And bottom line, by using the internal and the external coaches, think about how you're creating that coaching culture, what you want happening there, what you want that to look like, etc. So now let's dig in more. When you have that coaching program, you want to have a process for matching your coaches with your clients. Some of you were asking about this. So even when you have an internal coach doing the coaching, the matching is going to be important. This is a huge indicator of success of the relationship. So your ideal as an organization, have several internal coaches, and for that individual who's going to be coached, the client or the coachee, depending on which terminology you use, you're going to give them choice. Hey, these are the coaches that are available inside the organization. Who do you want to work with? And let them be involved in picking. When you're hiring external coaches for people, what we do is very similar. The individual who's going to be coached is typically given at least 3 different coaches to choose from. They can look at bios or resumes. They can set up interviews with those coaches so that they make sure it's a good pick. And you do want a very specific process for identifying the potential coaches and then for getting that individual client involved so that they are truly empowered to choose their own coach. And yes, there's value in measuring the outcome. Keep in mind when you set up your measures, some of it is quantitative. You can specifically measure if you have metrics inside the organization on productivity or engagement, you can measure change in that. You can measure retention rates. You can measure productivity rates, sales numbers, etc. There are also going to be qualitative measures, and what you're going to want to do is decide how you're going to track that. How are you measuring the qualitative impact? Is it survey-based? Is it based on qualitative feedback, etc.? So getting that. Then the success of the program is going to come from using both internal and external. You want a coaching culture by training and using internal coaches, and that's going to mean also having them available to your entry level through supervisor. And you're going to maximize your coaching outcomes by incorporating that external. So you're really pulling the best of all worlds by using both internal and external coaches. Remember, support the same team. They support each other and they coordinate their efforts. They're all working toward the same outcome of really empowering the individual clients so they create their meaningful change. Okay, as promised, there are a couple of different resources to make available for you so that you have the opportunity to get more information, find what you want, find what you're looking for. So the first is the International Coach Federation. It is a nonprofit professional membership organization. It is essentially the self-regulating body of the coaching profession. And members of the Internal Coach Federation have met standards for membership. They've had 60 hours of training. They're accountable to that code of ethics, etc. Then in terms of external training, the Center for Coaching Certification. In terms of a resource for finding coaches, the Center for Coaching Solutions. So the CoachFederation.org is the website for the International Coach Federation. A lot of great information available to you there. The Center for Coaching Certification, where you have access to that external training for coaches, and the website is centerforcoachingcertification.com. The Center for Coaching Solutions is a resource. Whether you want consulting for starting and running a coaching program, you want to bring training in-house, and sometimes there's a program called Coaching Skills for Leaders where it's really just developing those basic coaching skills. Sometimes you go all the way and you want that full-blown certification, so you have those choices. And it's also a great resource for finding a coach because the Center for Coaching Solutions is the sister company, the Center for Coaching Certification, and there's over 600-700 people that have been trained through the Center for Coaching Certification. So finding a coach that's a good match is a great opportunity when you've got access to that kind of talent in the coaching space. Resources include our blog, books we publish every year, the free webinars like this one. We're available for a quick check for you if you just want to call or email and ask a quick question. And then also as an outsourcing resource. So very specifically, the blog is Center for Coaching Certification, and you can access it right from the website. Each year we publish a book. The chapters are written by different coaches. You've got a lot of great talent and information in those. We do these free 30-minute webinars every month, and we also offer a 60-minute every other month. Make sure you are on our newsletter email list so that you get access to that. I mentioned a quick call or email is available to you. Most of you have my name and phone number. It's accessible through your registration information. In terms of the outsourcing, the Center for Coaching Solution is available for consulting, for training, and then also for coaching. Whether it's one person or dozens of people, we've got coaches available. At the beginning, I mentioned that I had something for you. I actually got a couple of somethings for you for today's call. So the first one is the free consultation. You want a 30-minute conversation to talk about what the different opportunities, get more questions answered, find out more information. That's available to you. Now, in terms of choosing resources, I've got one available to you. If you go to the Center for Coaching Solutions website, you will see that you can request for free our white paper called Starting and Running an Internal Coaching Program. So it gives you lots of information plus examples for how to have an internal coaching program. And then, of course, you want to be intentional and plan your process and implement your strategy for what you're doing. That's how you're going to achieve the results. Now, I am going to wrap up. I'm going to answer any additional questions. If you've got some, get them into the question panel. I do realize we've used our 30 minutes, and some of you have things scheduled So I do want to say thank you to each and every one of you for investing time in yourself and with us in having this conversation. Definitely appreciate you being here. We do want to be available to you and be helpful to you, so let us know how we can best do that. Those of you that want to get going or have other things scheduled, of course, feel free. Those of you that are here and want to stay around and get other questions answered, of course, we're going to do that. So make sure you're typing those in the question panels. And I do appreciate those of you that are typing in the thanks and et cetera. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So other question that came in here, how do you identify other alternatives for selecting an external or an internal coach? So some of the things to encapsulate that you're addressing, first off, is the cost. How much money is the company going to invest in this? Are they open to an external coach? Do they want it to be an internal? And what's the criteria for that? When you are identifying a coach, how are you doing it? So first off, it's an awareness of, hey, what are the objectives for the individual coachee? What is it they want to accomplish? Is it skill development, strategizing, et cetera? And given that, what type of expertise is important to that individual in terms of who their coach is? And once you know that, you have the opportunity to identify several potential coaches. In addition to knowing who your coaches are internally as a company, when you work with an organization like, for example, the Center for Coaching Solutions, what that means is you're going to work with someone who you can go to them and say, okay, this is what this individual wants to accomplish. And then that organization is doing the work to figure out which coaches are potentially a good fit and providing that individual with several options. And then at that point, of course, the individual gets to either review the bios or the resumes, or they get to have that initial conversation and interview them and say, hey, is this a good person for me? So that's hopefully clarifying that. I have got another one here with a question on differences in coaching certifications. So if you're hiring, for example, an external coach or you're training your internal coach, what are the differences? And of course, that's a great challenging question. I will share with you, each month we do a 1-hour program where we talk about coaching certification and answer questions like this. So I'm going to give you a quick answer here and a resource to get more information. The quick answer is you really do want to look for a program that is approved by the International Coach Federation. The good news is that gives you over 400 options, and that's actually both good news and bad news. Over 400 choices is a lot to choose from. So on our YouTube channel, which you can access from either of the websites, there is a link to the recording of the program on coaching certification, and it talks about what to look for in a program, some of the different pros and cons, some of the considerations in making a decision, etc. So great question. Thank you very much for that. Okay, another question. How do internal and external coaches interact? It's a great question to share with you, and actually I think I've got another one that's really similar to that. Okay, so how do they interact? It does vary based on the organization. So some organizations actually take the initiative to have a conversation on a regular basis with both internal and external coaches where they're talking about best practices, pros and cons, discussing general strategies, etc. The caveat being, of course, they're not sharing any specific information. It's all the big picture concepts, letting each other know, amongst other things, who they are and what they're available for, etc. So there are different ways to set that up. A lot of that is organizational based. What makes sense for them, what the organization is open to doing, willing to do, and taking on the time for doing, etc. So great questions there. Thank you for that. Thank you all of you that are writing down all the comments. Glad you enjoyed it. Glad this was helpful to you. Definitely appreciate that. You've all got my phone number there. You've got our email address. Whatever else I can do to be helpful, let me know. And if you do want to take advantage of that free 30 minutes, same thing, let me know. And what I'll do is email you a link to my calendar. You can schedule the 30 minutes, and we'll answer whatever questions you've got. Find out wherever you want to go with that. That'll be your time. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy your day.